past, present, and emerging, and welcome in particular any First Nations peoples with us today. And I invite you to do your own acknowledgements in the chat. In recognition of the very important vote tomorrow, I also want to acknowledge that Aidan is a signatory to the Allies for Uluru Statement and supports the Yes campaign. And personally, I will be voting yes tomorrow too. Today is the first part of what we intend to be a two-part briefing from our colleagues at DFAT. Before I introduce Tim and Ariane and ask them to provide an overview of their work, let me speak briefly to why we're bringing these sessions to you. The Pacific is obviously Australia's near neighbour and strategic region politically, but tropical holiday resorts and tourism can hide deep underlying poverty, particularly in those remote regions. The region is obviously also highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change, but changing that requires grant and investment capital. DFAT recently completed a development finance review, which I know the team will speak a little bit about, but key findings of that review and subsequent recommendations included that instruments such as loans, equity, insurance, and guarantees can be deployed to meet a variety of development needs at a much larger scale than simple aid and with a wider array of potential financing partners. The report also recommended enhanced engagement and collaboration with philanthropic organisations and impact investors where their objectives align with Australia's interests. Clearly, that's why we're here today. We all know that bringing in other sources of capital not only builds the pot of funding, but it also helps us learn together. Through the Business Partnerships platform, the Australian Infrastructure Financing Facility for the Pacific is calling for applications from potential business partners to deliver reliable and sustainable renewable energy to remote and rural communities in the Pacific and Timor-Leste. The team today is going to introduce you to the BPP and the opportunity for philanthropic organisations to partner with the program. Our next webinar will look at the specific opportunities more fully. So let me introduce the team. Tim Gill is the Director of Climate and Policy with the Australian Infrastructure Financing Facility for the Pacific. And Tim, you can tell me how you say AFIF or whatever it is. I was tried multiple forms and it all came out wrongly. Tim's worked on Australia's official aid program for 16 years with a focus on climate, renewable energy, food security, education and health, including diplomatic postings in Kiribati and Fiji. Ariane Gauchard works with the Palladium Group as team leader in the business platforms. Oh, sorry, I don't know where that's come from. Ariane works as a team leader in the Business Partnerships Platform program, and Ariane has 2 decades of experience in leveraging the expertise and resources of private investors and philanthropists to improve livelihoods in some of the world's poorest countries. Ariane previously spent 14 years with the US government's Millennium Challenge Corporation. So the team is going to provide you with a short overview of the work they're doing and the potential opportunities. Then we're going to run a Q&A session with Tim and Ariane. So if you have questions, please do drop them in the chat and we'll pick them up and bring them into that session. Tim and Ariane, I'm handing over to you.
Thanks so much, Claire. Just checking you can hear me okay. Great. And just also acknowledging that I'm coming to you from Ngunnawal country here in Canberra, and acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging, and also pay my respect to all the Indigenous people who might be on this call and who are throughout this great nation that we live in and come from. So I just wanted to run through for you a little bit of the background in a few slides before I hand over to Ariane, who can tell you a bit more about this specific call for partnerships. And I wanted to just give you a flavour, I guess, for who we are and why we're doing this, if that's okay. So firstly, and thanks, Claire, for trying to pronounce the impossible to pronounce, AFIF. or Australian Infrastructure Financing Facility for the Pacific. Pronounce it however you like. It's a pretty awkward acronym, we know, but it is a serious investment vehicle that has really transformed the way that Australia is able to do infrastructure development in the Pacific region. So $4 billion worth of financing capability. That's a combination of $3 billion in loans and $1 billion in grants, which we can use to provide really key infrastructure priority financed projects across the Pacific and Timor-Leste. So we can do sovereign grants, sovereign loans, private sector loans, blended finance, and all the combinations that go with that. And that's enabled us to develop a pretty healthy pipeline of investments covering many different sectors, from ICT, energy, water, transport, and roads, and many other types of investments that meet the priority needs of our Pacific region. We also make sure we have a climate resilient approach to all of this, of course, because we want everything to be sustainable, and maybe goes without saying, but I'm coming to you from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, in which we have an office for the Pacific. Is the next slide about the Pacific? It is, yeah. So we thought, just in case there's just not to assume too much knowledge, what is the Pacific? So it's this region that's to the kind of north and the east of Australia. If you think about the top end of far north Queensland, just to the north of that, through the Torres Strait, is Papua New Guinea. Melanesia spreads out eastward from there. So the biggest countries, most populated countries of the region, Papua New Guinea, Solomons, Vanuatu, Fiji, is all part of Melanesia. And then we've got Polynesia, countries like Samoa, Tonga, and then going up north, what's known as Micronesia, so generally smaller island states spread out across the ocean, countries like Kiribati, where I was posted last year, Marshall Islands, Federated States of Micronesia, etc. So it's all that area you can see where there's a lot of ocean and some small dots amongst it, and some larger islands. We also include Timor-Leste, that you can see just to the left of your image there, just north of Darwin, because it's a Melanesian country, and so it has similar kind of needs and cultures to the region, though it's usually considered part of Southeast Asia. So there you go. That's the region we're talking about, and we're talking in that region specifically about the what we call overseas development assistance eligible countries. In other words, the poorer countries. We're not talking about funding to New Caledonia or French Polynesia, so it's the less developed countries, which is most of them. Next slide, please. So just a few words about climate change in the Pacific. I think it's pretty well known that the Pacific is quite vulnerable to climate change. I was wondering if it is a bit of a geographic bias from Australia, but if you look at the index of the most vulnerable nations for climate change, the global index, in the kind of 25 most vulnerable countries, you can see already quite a lot of countries in the Pacific: Micronesia, Tonga, Solomon Islands, Nauru, Marshall Islands, Vanuatu, Papua New Guinea, and that's not to mention Kiribati or Tuvalu, which were unable to be measured because just the measurements are wrong for these very small countries that have maybe 2 meters clearance above sea level and are in the middle of a vast ocean. So climate vulnerability is really a feature of this region. And that takes the form of an increasing frequency and intensity of tropical cyclones. We've got floods and droughts that we're experiencing through these La Nina, El Nino cycles, which seem to be becoming more severe. Saltwater intrusion, sea level rise, storm surges, increasing wave pressure, and the impacts on coral reefs that we know from our own Great Barrier Reef can be quite devastating for countries that really rely on those reefs for their structural integrity as well as their food security. So some of the key risks are coastal erosion, food and water insecurity, and infrastructure damage. Next slide, please. So what's Australia doing about it? Well, you know, this government that we have is very committed to climate change and has set more ambitious targets which have been legislated to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 43% below 2005 levels, which will allow us to meet our net zero target by 2050 and helps the world to keep that 1.5 degree of warming within reach. As part of that commitment, we're radically transforming our energy grid, as you know, so that we'll get to 82% renewable energy in the mix by 2030. We recognise for the region, as well as for ourselves, that climate change is the biggest security threat facing the region, and we've signed a declaration alongside the Pacific leaders to say that that is the case. So we really do recognise this as a key risk to everything we're doing in the region. As part of our contribution to climate change, we're committing $2 billion in climate finance through the current period, which is the 5-year period ending in 2025. And of that $2 billion of our aid funding, $700 million will go towards this specific Pacific region, which is facing these threats, as you know. And the thing that we really want to talk to you most about today is a new vehicle for delivering our climate support to the region, which is the Pacific Climate Infrastructure Financing Partnership. Unfortunately, another acronym, Claire, that's part of the territory when you work with government, or PCIFP. So I'll just tell you a little bit more about PCIFP, I think, in the next slide. Thanks, Ariane. So this is just to tell you a little bit more, firstly, about renewables in the region. So as you're all aware, the world is going through a major transition from fossil fuel-based energy through to renewable energy. And since climate change is a huge threat to the region, as well as, and unfortunately due to the size of the file, I couldn't show you, but we have stats about energy access in the region, and it's really quite poor. There are places like Papua New Guinea and Vanuatu where only around 15 to 16% of the population have access to energy. So we're really talking about 3 to 4 million people in our immediate neighbourhood who don't have access to energy, and especially people who are in these rural and remote regions. So access to energy really does drive development. Without energy, it's very hard to turn the lights on. It's hard to run a small business. It's hard to refrigerate your food. It's hard to irrigate your crops. And so many of the other things that we kind of take for granted in our cities. In rural and remote parts of Australia, they don't take it for granted, and I know many of you who are working in those areas don't take it for granted either. So we're really trying to draw on the best that Australia has to offer from our work in rural and remote parts of our own country, and take that learning, take the systems, take the technology, take the financing, take the partners to the region to try to help address some of that real gap in energy access, and really helping in the way that mobile phones have helped the whole world access telecommunications when it was pretty limited to rich countries for probably a century or so, and we've seen many countries, in fact the whole world, leapfrog into a new ability to communicate thanks to technology like mobile phones, and thanks to the cost and technology of solar, wind, hydro, and other forms of renewables. Now we have a new opportunity to take parts of our region forward into better access to energy that's sustainable, affordable, and renewable. So this is really the opportunity that's in front of us, and we're really trying to take the best of Australia's learning about doing this into the rural and remote parts of the region. Thanks, Ariane. So to tell you more specifically about this PCIFP, or Pacific Climate Infrastructure Financing Partnership. So this was a pre-election commitment from the current government, and it comprises 3 components. One is where we have our major investments in AIFFP that I mentioned to you. We want to do more that are climate specific, so that you'll be seeing in our portfolio an increasing number of major grid scale hydro, solar projects, as well as some major climate adaptation projects. So that's component one. Component two, we'll be looking at all of our projects, whether they're ports or roads, telecommunications cables, or any of the other things we're investing in, and making them as green as we possibly can. So we're dedicating funds to really make our whole portfolio as climate ready and low emitting as possible. And then this third component, which is the one we're focusing on today, is where we're taking renewable energy out to rural and remote parts of the Pacific. So there's many places that are small islands, distant from other places. They'll never be able to connect up to a grid. The grid can only go so far in these Pacific environments. So how can we bring, renewable energy to those places that either have no access to energy, or perhaps have, a simple solar panel that's just delivering light and nothing else, and maybe isn't well maintained, or they have a small diesel generator that many communities are now finding it impossible to afford, as well as the noise and the pollution that come from it. So we're really looking to do more in this third component in those rural and remote areas. And next slide. So part of this component three is that we're going to bring Australian aid grants to the table, but we're looking for co-investment. So I just wanted to spend a slide talking to you about why we're looking for co-investment. So as I mentioned, there's quite a lot of cheap products that are getting out there into the Pacific, and many people are finding themselves handed out a solar panel that they can use to charge their phone and put a light on, but a lot of it's poor quality. It's donated up front. There's no plans for support or maintenance. A lot of them break down quickly and are simply thrown away. So this is the sad reality that we're seeing in the region. Australia is committed to quality infrastructure that delivers sustainable benefits, as you'll see if you take some time to look at our AIFFP portfolio of major investments. And we want to bring that quality agenda to these smaller scale investments. So from the beginning, we want to be able to plan for maintenance support. And that means after the grant is kind of spent, we need other sources of income to come in behind it. So a typical model that we might see through these investments that we're going to talk about today could be that DFAT covers much of the initial capex cost of say, a solar mini grid, for example, and a co-investing partner, which could be a community, it could be a commercial investor, an owner operator, it could be a Pacific government, or it could be one of you on this call, could fund relatively small ongoing operational and maintenance expenses. So that means that we've got factored in a way to continue the maintenance support that we know we really need. To do this, we know we need new partnerships and new ways of co-investing, and we realized this some time ago when we set up this business partnerships platform around 7 years ago. So that's our dedicated vehicle, amongst several others now, that helps us to co-invest with the private sector and the investment community. And that's why we've chosen to work with BPP on this quite ambitious new venture into off-grid renewable energy in the region. Next slide, Ariane. Oh, here we are. Okay, so this is just to let you know that we've done some serious consultations. And this is my last slide. So we've been talking over the past 6 months since we started work towards this with the private sector, with other donors, with regional organizations, and with many private sector actors through the Clean Energy Network, the Smart Energy Network. We've been to roadshows in Sydney and Brisbane, Melbourne, and talked to many different actors. We've talked with our other counterparts across government, DQ, ARENA, CSIRO. We've been talking with NGOs, and thanks to ACFED, who've been a great partner in that process, as well as the university sector and the First Nations Clean Energy Network. So this is really, I suppose, just our experience, Claire, has been that when we talk to these groups for the first time, and I think this also does apply to the philanthropy network, there was a lot of head scratching about, you know, why we would want to get together in something like this. But I have seen a real change over the course of this, building this call for proposal, the course of our conversations, and seen a real enthusiasm coming out, both from the renewable energy sector, the NGO sector, our other donor partners, and increasingly investors who are looking to do something that really is perhaps a little bit niche, but has huge social and economic impact, as well as potential financial returns. So we're seeing a lot of enthusiasm, and I know Ariane has been, well, I won't say bombarded, but very, very pleasantly surprised by the huge amount of interest that this call for partnerships has generated. So thanks to all of you for joining this call as well, and we hope that you'll be able to join in the excitement that's coming up around this new approach. And with that, I think, Claire, I can just hand over straight to Ariane to keep us going. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Tim. So just a quick word on the BPP, or Business Partnership Platform. So as Tim mentioned, we've been supporting DFAT since 2016 to embark on sort of really new ways of working for DFAT. So to bring DFAT together in partnership with businesses, NGOs, and other organizations. So we've worked across a wide variety of geographies and sectors, so supported 57 partnerships in 19 countries, creating new products and services, improving value chains, and improving kind of business practices. And as you can imagine, have some great experience and lessons learned to share from the last 7 years. Our middle name is partnership, and that's really how we operate in terms of the frameworks, and a real recognition that a diversity of organizations bring skills, expertise, and resources needed to address these really complex and difficult challenges and solutions. So I could talk to you about many examples, but I think the best way to understand what we do and what we have done is just to share one. So I'll just play a really brief video for you all.
Solar power pegoya and no count time because I using lamp kerosene and satarim samla sumu and then plain and sagim siklu lumibla and sabarabim mibla.
Solar Pago is a company in Papua New Guinea aimed at spreading affordable, accessible, high-quality solar home units to the remote and rural regions. Our aim is to get this quality lighting out to everybody so that people can run business, people can work with writing letters and dealing with business at home, marking papers when they're teachers. Students are able to study into the night as required rather than trying to get it all done by 5:30 or 6 o'clock. Women who work aren't having to rush home to get chores done, but they can get them done during the evening.
I live in a remote part of water district in Anga province, and there is no power in my area. With the help of Solar Pago, I am making more money out of my small scale business in the poultry, in the trade store, and in my smoker table. I have 6 children, and they find it hard before. When I got a Solar Pago, my children sit around the table and they study the improvements. I saw them in their marks too. Solar Pago has helped me a lot.
And now in solar comes some reply using solar and sleep the light and sigula benefits the solar. Mika master proof na click and sit down with history tonight with a okay belong to some Bible story to Sonia Master solar.
It's been a privilege for us to work with the BPP initiative. Having DFAT as a partner has allowed us to accelerate our access to the remote and rural regions of the country, and DFAT have worked as a catalyst to ensure that we get light to as many people as quickly as possible.
Solar later, any good place right long, give you light long or remote areas.
Having a business that creates a social impact is very special, to all of us at Solar Pago, to be able to go out and make a difference to people's lives in Papua New Guinea, to make a difference to people's lives where they're in regions where their access to services is so limited, makes it all the more rewarding every time we step out the door.
So that's just one example. So BPP in the past has funded a smaller portfolio of renewable energy partnerships in various calls. I think my colleague's going to put just a link in the chat if you're interested in seeing some more examples of what we've done in the past. But I'll move now to really the objectives of this round. And Tim set out the context really clearly for why DFAT and AIF are moving forward. But basically what we're trying to achieve is, one, to increase access to reliable and affordable off-grid energy for these rural and remote communities that you just got a glance of in that video. Making sure that those enhancements to infrastructure really do have a concrete impact on lives and livelihoods and climate resilience of the communities, with a special attention to impact on women, who we know are disproportionately impacted by climate change impacts and can also really be a key part of solutions moving forward. And really to market test new ideas. That could be around technology, or it could be really around approaches, particularly around the issues Tim mentioned around sustainability. So this is a round that can support pilots at a small scale, see what works, adapt models that could then be scaled moving forward. So what do we look for in partnerships? And I assure you we have some wonky rubrics that go along with these criteria, but at a really basic level, you know, we take quite a lot of time and bring in a diversity of experts to think about, are proposals really going to provide meaningfully new or more reliable energy for these communities? Will that access indeed result in measurable impacts to those communities, again, particularly for women and other marginalized groups? Is there a model to really carry the work forward, so we can ensure that those investments will will sustain and support communities over the long term and not cause any harm to communities? So here we may really look at a blend of resources, given the remote nature of some of these communities, as Tim mentioned, and we see this as an area where philanthropy and other actors could play a key role. Partnership, do you have the right people coming to the table? We know that a partner that really knows and understands and works with the community is so vital to effective development, not just in this space, but more broadly in development. And you see that really reflected for any of folks who are following DFAT's newly released development policy. Value for money, is this a good investment overall? So what kind of skin in the game are there from the partners to show that this really will work over the long term? And from a cost benefit perspective, these are taxpayer dollars being invested, so we take a hard look at that perspective. So what do we see here as the opportunities for philanthropy? We're still in relatively early days, but we've gotten in a number of proposals so far. And we see kind of two buckets. So there's two levels of funding available through this call for proposals. One is to support piloting new solutions, new technology, business models, and partnerships. So the funding range available from BPP there can range from $50,000 to $250,000. The emerging opportunity we're seeing is really for philanthropists to come and fill a key missing piece of the puzzle. So that could be, as Tim cited, kind of helping to make a long-term commitment to operations and maintenance. Some aid programs such as this one have constraints. So there's a 2-year time frame for our investments, but there could be a really meaningful opportunity for those who are able to make a longer term commitment or put in some capital that could then pay out over time. There could also be opportunities for some spin-off activities. For example, if the community gets access to energy for the first time, are there related, say, income generation opportunities for women in those villages or communities? So a lot of kind of key gaps, and then potentially adding on activities that could really amplify impact for people living in those communities. The second opportunity is scaling solutions. So in this round, the higher funding ranges from $250,000 to $1 million over the 2 years. And that's really for taking solutions that have been tried and tested, at least in like contexts, and can be taken to a bigger scale. And there's an opportunity for philanthropists to come in and really help scale those solutions to more households, to more communities. There's clearly economies of scale, particularly given the incredible kind of logistics and transport constraints in some of these environments, to doing more. And so certainly happy to have discussions about co-investing at a bigger level to really impact a higher number of communities or a higher number of hospitals, schools that can be funded. I won't go into detail on the process, happy to answer any questions, but basically what this call for proposals looks like is an invitation to submit concept notes. So that's a really high level description of what partners are trying to achieve and how and what they're asking for from this program. And then those are assessed per the criteria I mentioned to see which ones have high potential. I mean, I think what's interesting and exciting is we have some flexibility there as proposals are finalized to think about, are there additional investors or partners that can be brought in? So it's quite a dynamic process. We'll then do a final selection, and we expect that those final selections will be made by the end of this calendar year for sort of implementation beginning next year, and that implementation of the BPP portion of these proposals would be carried out over the next 1 to 2 years. So what are some opportunities to connect? So if you're eager and interested from this call, there's sort of immediate opportunities to engage. As Tim mentioned, we've had a lot of energy and excitement. We had a networking call as well with potential partners. We're seeing a lot of suppliers who are interested, a lot of Pacific communities who are interested, and a lot of people really having challenging discussions about how do you address all of these aspects and who can you bring together. So if you're interested in connecting in now, my colleague will put a link in the chat. We've set up a LinkedIn group for people who are actively putting in applications. We have some people on there from communities in the Pacific saying, here's what we do locally. Here's our situation with power. We'd really like to link in. So connect there. We also have a list we've put together of interested partners that are happy to have their information and opportunity sets shared. So happy to share those with you, and more than happy to have a one-on-one conversation with a member of our team to discuss your interests going forward. As mentioned, we're envisioning a second session like this one once we've done that initial selection. So we will have a series of vetted high potential proposals that can be more directly pitching for the additional support that they're looking for. And the third is stay in touch for longer term opportunities through the BPP or some of the other programs that Tim mentioned, or more broadly in DFAT. Happy to kind of take your information just to make sure you get connected into the right folks to be informed as these broader efforts play out going forward. So we have a lot of information on the BPP website. If you're interested in learning more, do feel free to reach out. We have an applications inbox that just ensures that it gets manned no matter who's in the office that day. So you'll get a quick response if you reach out there. And I'm more than happy personally to connect with folks after this conversation. So Claire, I think I'll leave it there to leave time for Q&A. Thanks.
Thanks, Ariane. Thanks, Tim. They're both really very good overviews of the program. I'm just inviting people to put questions into the chat. And in the interim, I'm going to start with a couple of questions from me. So tell us, in terms of the timing on these specific opportunities and when you want to share them, tell us a little bit more about that. You know, and what do you think that will look like more specifically? Is it a presentation from yourselves, a presentation from the actual opportunity? Yeah.
Yeah, happy to take that one. So the concept notes, we've been looking at them on a rolling basis, but the final deadline for those is October 23rd. And then we'll be sort of shortlisting from that, and then moving proposals to a sort of full proposal stage. So by the end of November, we will have full proposals that have been really thoroughly vetted. And I think we do envision, if we've got interest from the partners, it would be great to have them kind of almost pitching and discussing directly some of those opportunities. I find personally working on this program really the most exciting and energizing part is being able to connect directly and partner with, really committed business and NGO and other professionals working in those communities that really bring in that business and social perspective. So I think for those interested, having that direct connection in a way is the best way to ignite if there's interest. So that's what I would say, Claire. There are immediate opportunities now if someone's super keen. So that's why I was saying we do have some interested applicants. I'll give you one example I've gotten permission to share, which is It's Time Foundation, which does fabulous work in Fiji, bringing solar to schools that have never had energy access. But in some of those remotest communities, that kind of maintenance model sort of relies on, parent raffles and some fairly kind of unpredictable streams. So that's a live example where they've already come in with the proposal and we've discussed maybe this is something someone could come in and co-invest in. So for sure, we'll have a lot of zipped up information by the end of November, but if people are interested in engaging, I guess we're also interested if people have a broader aligned interest in even hearing from them. What would they like to see from proposals? How would they like to engage with partners? So this is, we've done lots of partnerships. I think bringing in philanthropy at this stage is a bit new for this program. And so we're really keen to even get input on how people would like to best engage.
Yeah. Claire, do you mind if I just add one more thing to what Ariane said? I think that was really useful, but what I forgot to share with you is that this is kind of step one in a kind of a longer term approach. So we wanted to use BPP because it's kind of small, nimble and available now, and it can help us test the market. So this is where we find out what kind of funding combinations and partners and places and tech can come together to give us a good solution, kind of at the project by project level. So that's why, Ariane can share, this project in this particular place, in this community, could potentially deliver this result. But what we'll be doing is then going from there to kind of learn those lessons on what we can then scale. And that's where I think perhaps some of your members might be interested in what we can do at a bigger level, a multiple project level, even sector level, if we're looking to kind of, transition a whole, say health clinics across to renewable energy or telecommunications assets or, whatever it is. There are opportunities kind of at the bigger scale out there. And we will have a new program that we're currently designing in parallel with this program so that we learn in real time. And it's due to start in the first half of next year. So if your membership or anybody out there is, has some ideas for how we could do this at a bigger scale and how you might like to engage, now's a great time to kind of just, put that out there, and we can make sure the design team come and sit down with you and have a good discussion about what you think would work. For the long term, when we've got more finance to put towards this over, say, 5 years, we'll have some pretty significant funding. So there's more opportunities beyond this particular call.
Excellent, thanks, Tim. I've got a question that I'm going to make more generic, but I'm going to also ask the individual to send us details so you can respond more fully. But if you've got an organisation that operates, that runs things like rural farms, rehabilitating young people, is that the kind of location that you might install some of these opportunities, or a potential on-ground partner that you might work with?
So I think, look, this is open to any community that does not have access to power or organization. And I think it's really the case of what bringing that reliable power would do in terms of impact. So that could be with youth, that could be with, in terms of income generation, that could be households that have access to power, and the impacts are in terms of educational benefits, safety and security. So in terms of impacts to communities, it's quite broad. I think if people are in sort of specific communities, I would encourage them to look at who they could partner with. So there could be a philanthropist that's come in, interested in supporting, and then they're really looking at what kind of power solution would meet their needs, and bringing in the power solution, or as a either partner or contractor. So happy to have an offline discussion on more details there. But I think in general, for a proposal, it means sort of what is the need, and then what is the proposed solution to help address that need.
Okay. Another one for you both. In terms of the maturity of the tech, are you looking for things that are kind of close to ready? Is this about market testing? What do you have any specific kind of frames on that you're kind of looking at?
Tim, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I just dropped out for a small second. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Do you want me to repeat the question, Tim?
No, I got the question. So, I think it's a good one, a really good one actually, because we're not looking for kind of the globally untested or relatively untested tech. I think the testing comes in, how do you apply something that we know works technically well, is broadly speaking commercially viable, but hasn't really been tried in rural or remote parts of the Pacific, for example. That's the testing that we're doing, because it's a big logistical challenge to get to these quite remote places. They're hard to get to for even people, let alone to bring tech and to set up some kind of infrastructure. So the innovation is more in the location and the partners that we bring to the table, and probably less so in the tech itself. But the sector is changing really quickly, and we're open to any ideas. We know that there's biogas opportunities out there. We know that pico hydro works quite well in a lot of places. Solar is, of course, a go-to in lots of places, but won't work absolutely everywhere where there's too much cloud cover, for example, in highlands. So we are open to ideas, but it's probably not going to be world-leading emerging tech, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great. That's really helpful. Thank you. So for NGOs that are open to partnerships, what are the sort of specific kind of gives or contributions that you're looking for from them, and what are you what would they expect in return? Hopefully I've asked that question correctly. If I haven't, please correct me, whoever it was.
I'll probably give maybe an unsatisfying answer, but I think it really depends. So the exciting part about this model is that it enables, NGOs, businesses to come together in different ways and really think about sort of exciting ideas. So it's not very prescriptive on that. We certainly have examples where we've had NGOs serving as sort of the major partner and the contract partner and working with sort of local businesses. We have others where you've had a pretty significant established business that really knows a technology, but they haven't worked with types of communities before, or types of participants or consumers. And so an NGO can play a really helpful role. Well, they know how to do that community consultation. They know how to engage. So that's been quite a typically successful model where both parties, I always find after a couple of years when we're closing out these partnerships, the NGOs are saying, I was really interested. We're now using agile management. We learned from the business, and the businesses are saying, wow, we really learned so much about these market opportunities. So yeah, I think it's open. And I think, typically in terms of co-contributions from NGOs, you tend to see more that are in kind. Versus sort of cash contributions. But I think the world is changing. Lots of NGOs have relationships with companies with philanthropy as well. So I guess I invite you to think fairly creatively, and again, feel free to reach out if you'd want to have a discussion. And as mentioned, if you submit a concept, we do give feedback and have discussions. So there's always, if you've suggested something that's really bold, like there's always opportunities to to massage that going forward.
That's really helpful. Tim, did you want to add anything to that at all, or are you comfortable there? No,
No,
good.
that's fine.
Okay.
Yep. Thanks, Claire. Yeah, I suppose just what maybe very briefly, this is about knowledge sharing or intel. Who knows what about the most important bits of it? And the three important bits that I see, and it's probably a poor summary, you have to know the community really well to know what their needs are and know what's going to work. Is there land available? What kinds of energy access do they need for their development needs? You have to know the technology really well, and there's a lot of companies and in Australia who do that. And then you have to know the financing as well. So there's different players bring different parts to the table. Yeah, so hopefully that explains a little bit why we're looking for a partnership model.
And a question for you, Tim. Who, in terms of the larger scale opportunities with DFAT, who's the best person to contact at wherever you're calling it? I'm still not going to get it right.
No problem. What we've done is just asked Ariane to, any interest that's out there, just register it through that same BPP, so we're not confusing things. So if you have kind of small ideas, big ideas, medium ideas, feed them through that same applications at the BPP. Is that it? .com. That one that you showed. Maybe you can flick it up again.
Connor,
but the same, or
well.
just use the website as well. And if you say you're more interested in talking with our long-term design team, we'll make sure that that message gets through to the design team, just to kind of smooth the communications from here on. But yeah, we'll be really, really interested in any ideas you have for kind of scalable models. Thank you.
That's great. And just a reminder that address is in the chat. So I think that's the end of our questions at this point, folks. Really appreciate the time from Ariane and Tim to talk to us, and really encourage anybody who's got questions, ideas, interest in any form to get in touch. It's been a real pleasure to host this, and I would just remind everybody that we will be sending out both a recording and the PDF of the slides, I think, and maybe even a link to that longer form of the video, Ariane. So yeah, please do get involved, get interested, and we look forward to bringing some other opportunities back to you all. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Claire. Thanks, Aidan. Thanks, PA. Thanks, everyone.